Hey, great news everybody! I finally found a book that I strongly recommend that isn't written by Tim Keller. This is What's So Amazing About Grace by Yancy, and honestly, it's one of the best books that I've read, or to be more precise, listened to, in the last year or so. The book is really great, I'd highly recommend it. I'd say what I normally do, I think for Christian, non-Christian alike, but I think what it does talk about, what it does focus on, is the uniqueness of grace as part of the Christian faith and as part of Christ's teachings. So if you're a Christian, I think this is a great way to sort of challenge yourself, to think about how can I be more graceful, how can I show Christ's grace, and how can I appreciate the gospel of grace better? And if you're non-Christian, I think this is a helpful way of seeing what the Christian message should be. There's no shortage of rebukes of the Christian institutions and things that the church does. The author himself rebukes his own church and his own upbringing and things that he used to believe that he realized was not very Christ-like. And I think it's a really challenging, honest take on grace, its importance, and how often we show ungrace to one another. We don't show grace, and instead we sort of judge one another and don't give each other the benefit of the doubt or think about the best possible way of dealing with others. Now, the book is a little long, it's about 20 chapters, so I'm not going to go through a chapter summary of each one, but the chapters are broken up into 4 parts, and for each of these parts, I wanted to pick one chapter and tell you a little bit more about it, to hopefully get you a little bit more interested into the book. So the first part is called How Sweet the Sound, and this comes from the lyrics of Amazing Grace, where the song lyrics are, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. And, the whole book, you would say, is dedicated to finding out the answer to this question. Why is the grace so amazing? And in this first bit, he talks about the sound of grace, what grace is like, and how grace is different to the rest of the world. So there's a few different stories in here. All of them are really good. All of them show really good illustrations of grace. But the one I like is the new math of grace. And I believe this talks about the story where Jesus, or there's a person who owns a vineyard, who hires people at different times throughout the day, some in the start of the day, some at the middle, some at the end of the day, and pays everybody the same at the end of the day, despite the fact that some people work more than others. And you might say, that's unfair, right? The person who worked more should earn more. And yeah, if you're running a business, definitely pay people that way. If you try to pay people the Jesus way and give everybody who worked 1 hour the same amount of money that everybody who worked 12 hours, you're going to have no one who wants to take those 12-hour shifts. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is showing not how we should run businesses, but how God deals with us. God doesn't deal with us based on our merits, based on what we earn, based on what we deserve. If he did, we'd deserve death. We don't deserve any of the good things that he gives us. Instead, God's gift to us is grace. The person who has been really good, been a great kid, didn't do anything wrong, versus the one who is in jail or juvie or whatever from a young age, both of them need God's grace, and both of them get God's grace in the same way. And it's the new math of grace. It gives in a way that is very different to the rest of the world. The second section is called Breaking the Cycle of Ungrace. And this has a lot of stuff where it talks about what do we do in this world when someone wrongs us? Do we respond with vengeance, right? Chapter 9, getting even. Should we forgive them? Chapter 8, and why should we forgive them? Don't these people not deserve forgiveness? But the whole point of this section is showing how forgiveness breaks that cycle of ungrace. Someone does something wrong, someone does something bad, something that, you need to forgive them for. You don't have to forgive them. You can, take retribution, you can act out against them, you can, hurt them accordingly. But guess what? What are they going to do? They're going to take that hurt that you gave to them and they're going to turn it back on you. And I think he quotes in this Gandhi's line as well, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And this is the exact reason. You take my eye, I take your eye, well then you'll take my eye in response, and we go back and forward and across the world until vengeance has had its completion. Its completion only occurs when everybody is under it. But grace, forgiveness, breaks that cycle. It says, yes, you hurt me, but I forgive you. And why do we forgive? We forgive because we have been forgiven so much. This book, I think, goes really well with Tim Keller's Forgive. So if you've read that book and you like that book, I highly recommend you pick up that one. While that book, I think, maybe does a deeper dive into the theology of forgiveness, why we forgive, why we should forgive, and also its impacts. I think this book has really practical, really big picture need for grace and forgiveness in the world, in society, in our country, and what that looks like on a practical day-to-day life. Part 3 is called The Scent of Scandal, and there's a few different chapters here, but all of them point to this idea that if grace is so abundant, if grace is so free, if this gift of grace is so big that God has given us, Can't we abuse it? Can't we just say, I'll do more sin and then I'll get more grace and things like that? Now, the Bible does explicitly speak against that. Paul asks that exact question in Romans, and his response is absolutely not. How can we who died to sin continue to live any longer? But what the author says is that, yes, this scandal needs to be here. Part of the reason why we frown so much upon grace is we cannot understand the possibility of this scandal. How can I have a grace that is so great that it will save even someone as bad as Adolf Hitler? God's grace will save even a person like that. And the chapter I like here is chapter 12. It's called No Oddballs Allowed. And it comes to the idea of what is all of those Old Testament laws about. So if you look at Old Testament laws, there's some laws that say, you can't eat certain types of fish like eels or things like that. You can't have certain types of animals that walk on land if they don't have clothed hooves, whatever, things like that. And so what unifies all of these laws? Why did God give these laws? And there's a couple of different reasons and people have different explanations. But one thing that someone said is basically the one rule that seems to encapsulate all of the Old Testament, ceremonial laws and things is no oddballs allowed. Fish normally have scales, so weird fish like eels that don't have scales, not allowed. Cattle and things like that have those closed hooves, so weird animals that don't have that, not allowed. No oddballs allowed. That's the stuff that makes you unclean. But when it comes to the New Testament, we hear the complete reversal of that story. Peter gets that message that he's able to eat everything, don't call anything unclean. And what God is really telling us in the New Testament is actually we're all oddballs, we're all weird, we're all fallen short, but we still all get invited to where God wants us to be. We still get shown God's grace. It's a complete reversal, it's a completely new way and a new paradigm of thinking about who we are and where we are going to be. The last section is called Grace Notes for a Deaf World. And this has a few chapters which talks about some very practical examples of grace or ungrace or things like that we see in society. The last chapter here I think is the one that I remember most strongly, and it was called Gravity and Grace. And it talks about how there's two forces in the world, or fundamental forces in the world. They have this force of gravity, which, from wherever you are will bring two objects in the universe together, it attracts them together to each other. And in a day-to-day context, it is the natural way of doing things, the natural attraction that causes you to, seek retribution or do these different things, but act in this natural way of gravity. And then there is grace. There is the way that breaks it. There's the way that goes above and beyond. There's the way of grace, and that is shown in our society. And it talks about the change that happens when we show grace, how Christians should show grace. Another one of these chapters is called Serpent Wisdom, and it talks about that verse that Jesus says to his disciples, to be innocent as doves, but shrewd as serpents. And that requires both parts to be true. You need to be innocent, you need to do good, you need to show good, you need to act in that good way. But you need to be shrewd, you need to understand the hearts of man, you need to understand how people work, and you need to employ your grace and the way that you give it in that shrewd way. Now he says something that I think is definitely true, where he says that often Christians are as innocent as serpents and as shrewd as doves, where we actually end up doing wicked things in the defense of righteousness or in trying to do the right thing. And we aren't very strategic in how we do stuff. He gives examples of sort of the American religious scene where Christians, yes, fight for things like abortion or gay marriage or things like that, where they think they're weighty, important matters that are actually talked about in the Bible. But they also fight for stuff like gun protection or gun conservation, which is definitely not in the Bible. It's not one of those things that is a really weighty matter you need to throw your force behind. And so he says that we in the West, or in the US particularly, they've mixed those things, these sort of politically conservative with religiously conservative. And what that's meant is that's kind of diluted the message. No longer are we just standing for, rights or for good things. We're standing for so many things that no one really knows what we stand for, no one really respects what we stand for. This element of being strategic and focusing on the most important things is a big part of those last few chapters. So overall, I'd highly, highly recommend this book. I actually think I might recommend it more as an audiobook than a written book. I haven't physically read this book, I've just listened to it, but I think it works so well as an audiobook because he tells a lot of stories. Every single chapter is based around at least one or more stories, and those stories are really easy to follow when you're listening to the narrator there. So that book title again, it's What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancy. I know for some people I might be quite late to the party on this because the book did come out in 1997, but there was a revised edition in 2023. And so there is mention of stuff like COVID and a few other more modern things in this book as well. But it's true that he does talk about a lot of presidents from the 80s and 90s. but who can really blame him for that? So, What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancy. I highly recommend you check it out, give it a listen, give it a read, and let me know what you think about it.